opinion on Sky News Australia starts now. Live, this is Outsiders.
Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that does to woke virtue signalling lovies and hand-wringing PC lefties what a single dose of Trump derangement syndrome can do to your average, everyday, rational human being.
Are you kidding me, law enforcement? Are you kidding me? Tonight in Grand Rapids, multiple law enforcement officers stood behind Donald Trump as he spoke. People that are elected officials like sheriffs, others hired to protect and enforce the law for the entire citizenry, not for a political party.
Yes, it appears some Democrats didn't take too kindly to Donald Trump attending the funeral of a slain NYPD officer. Tell us why again?
Explicitly forbidden from being a partisan authoritarian police force standing on stage, entirely unethical, probably illegal, on top of which Donald Trump has been indicted 91 times.
Oh, yes, he's been indicted 91 times. Oh, yes, there's 91 indictments, but surely there must be more than just that to take into account. Guess what? There is.
He's liable for sexual assault. His entire business was found to be fraudulent. And law enforcement has the fucking gall to stand on stage with him. Enough is enough.
Ah, yes, Trump derangement syndrome coming to a lefty near you for the next 9 months. It's alive and kicking. Better get used to it, folks. In the meantime, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. What a surprise! The boats are pouring in. Well, a boat poured in last night up in the Kimberley area at Rita. Another bunch of arrivals. What a surprise. The Labor Party in full swing.
Well, you weaken policies and the boats come back. The people smugglers see if there is a trade to be had there. And this 15, we've had, what, is this the third or fourth? Third arrival. So they're testing the waters. That's what's happening here. They're seeing what happens. Is there a product you can take to market and say, yes, there is a way to get to Australia, to skip the very lengthy lines and processes that are in place for people who are wanting to come here legally, whether they're seeking asylum or whether they're coming here as economic migrants. And, James, they're looking for ways to bypass that process.
Well, of course they are. I mean, it is sort of interesting to me that they're said to be, I believe, Chinese nationals, given that,
exactly.
You know, it is very possible for Chinese nationals to fly here and claim asylum, and then it's almost impossible, once they've gone through that system, to be removed from the country. The interesting thing, though, to me about this, too, is also, you know, this is great proof of the old rule that when the right screws up, that's the story. But when the left screws up, it's the right's reaction. That's the story. And, of course, you know, all we've seen the last 24 hours since, or 12 hours since it's come out and all over Twitter is everybody saying, oh, no. You know, you see Peter Dutton, he's trying to bang the drum about boat arrivals and so on and so forth, and turning it into, you know, a story about conservative overreaction to something as important as border security.
Well, do they want more people to drown on our borders trying to get here before we're allowed to react and say this is an issue? Is that what they're waiting for?
That's exactly what the way it plays out. It's pathetic. I mean, the Labor Party are a clown show, as we know, and the failure to secure our borders is a direct result of them dismantling the previous policies of the previous coalition government. The South Australian Voice, the Libs have come out now, and it appears, James, that they are going to say they will repeal this thing if they get back into power in South Australia. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that does seem to be what they are saying, and good on them. I mean, this is the sort of leadership that we need from Liberal oppositions around the country. You know, people who've been watching this show for the last few weeks know that we've had an awful lot of focus on South Australia, this Voice, the repeal legislation. But it all comes, of course, back to this huge bullet that we dodged nationally last year when the people voted overwhelmingly to say we do not want this sort of thing. South Australia still saddled themselves with it. And what happens? Well, of course, it's become this body where very few people have voted for it. There's all these little sinecures attached to it. And all of these groups of people who some got there with no votes at all are going to have the right to make these special representations to Parliament.
Some got there with a total of 6 votes.
Some got
so
there with none.
basically, if you got your immediate family to vote for you, you're in. But I think this is also important to note that both with South Australia and their Voice, and Victoria's got something called the First People's Assembly, where they've had a couple of elections, the turnout has been abysmal, under 10%. So that tells you the Indigenous people themselves, the ones who are eligible to participate in this process and eligible to vote, aren't interested because they're not voting. They're far more likely to vote in state, federal, council elections than they are for these bodies that are dedicated, which tells you it is the activist class who wants this. This isn't something we were lied to throughout the referendum debate about this is led by the Indigenous community. All Indigenous people want this, or the overwhelming majority of them do. Well, no, because when they actually have them at a state level, they don't want to participate in it.
And you're right to point out, Rita, that it is the Indigenous Australians living, working, classic great Australian lives who are completely disinterested in this stuff. They know that big government delivers nothing. They know it's all ideology, left-wing ideology. One of those who was a strong supporter of The Voice, in fact, she claimed to be untethered when she heard the results of The Voice. Untethered. That's another word for unhinged, perhaps. There are many synonyms for untethered. Disconnected from reality would be another one. They've picked her as our new Governor-General. I'll be talking about this appropriately in Clown Show later on in the show today. But Sam Mostyn was Albanese's pick for the new Governor-General, James. Your thoughts?
My thoughts? Well, I mean, I've got a few thoughts. I know you'll be covering this a bit later on in the programme, Ron, but let me just say that I think that it is absolutely remarkable that we now essentially have the Governor-General for Human Resources here in this very high office of the land. It's really remarkable to me, a couple of things, though. They've broken the mold of Governor-Generals and now said that essentially this path of going through corporate boardrooms and being involved with diversity efforts and lobbying for political things and being a Labour staffer, this well-worn path, and we all know tons of people in places like Sydney and Melbourne who've done this. You know, this is now not being a general, not a life of public service. This is the way to the highest office of the land, which we honour. And I'll say one last thing. We are heading potentially towards a hung parliament at the next election. The advice of the Governor-General will be crucial. It is absolutely crucial that that office be held by someone who is seen to be above the political fray. And I'm afraid that is not Sam Mostyn.
An advisor to the Teals,
Labour staffer, someone who has been a leftist activist across the board, whether it's global warming, whether it's gender quotas, whether it's The Voice, who has been so political, always on the left. If you want her to be apolitical, then good luck. And the mere fact that upon getting this honour, she wiped her social media footprint. She went to Twitter, or X as we call it, and wiped her account and whatever has been posted there. Obviously, some of those tweets have...
some have surfaced.
And they tell you, you know, she's using hashtags like always was, always will be. She's using hashtags like Invasion Day. This is not someone who is has mainstream, Australian.
And of course, there's always the classic irony that although she's not explicitly been a Republican, her sympathies have clearly been with the Republican movement. She worked with Paul Keating. Just now the Governor-General is just laughable.
Well, one other thing, too, is, you know, I have spoken to MPs on both sides of politics about this, and there are some Labour MPs out there who are not thrilled with this choice at all, including one who said that this person had a career in essentially corporate greenwashing and that they were somebody that big companies would put on their boards to create this sort of impression that they're doing diversity and inclusion, while in fact, you know, they're doing all the other things that they do.
This is something Janet Albrechtsen wrote a brilliant column about throughout the week, about how there's this select group of women who put themselves or get on elected to boards, and they're very carefully guard those positions. There's a very small number, but it gives the corporates a way to say, oh, look at our board, look at the diversity and the gender targets we're meeting. So it's something that serves them well. Whether it serves the sisterhood well is another question entirely.
Whether it serves Australia well is another question again.
That's, I think, obvious.
Now, we always like to bring you the good news on this show. This is we're a positive group here, and we like to have the best and the exciting news. The great news this weekend is, of course, that Matt Kean has distanced himself from the Liberal Party's push towards nuclear. This is good news, because what this means is Peter Dutton is definitely going to win the next election. The more Matt Kean disagrees with you, the more likely you are to be successful in politics. That's the basic rule of thumb. So we have the Libs getting close, pushing more and more towards nuclear, which is great. The next election, hopefully, will be a very, very clear choice for the people of Australia, and they will make this choice based on either you go nuclear to wealth and prosperity and cheap electricity, cheap energy and a booming economy, or you pursue this madness of renewables, which means blackouts, which means money down the drain, soaring bills for your electricity prices and so on. That's the choice for Australia, nuclear versus renewables. Fantastic. Bring it on, because this will put Peter Dutton in the lodge, in my opinion, Rita.
Well, yes, but not Matt Kean's opinion. His fine sort of analysis is that, we should rethink this nuclear strategy. I wonder why that is. Could it possibly be, James, because so many of the people who are heavily invested in renewables, and a lot of those people are fans of Matt Kean, can see their investment, their taxpayer-funded, subsidised investments, being blown out of the water? Because if you have nuclear, if you've got a reliable, cheap, and also it's baseload power, it's consistent power, it's not reliant on weather, then why do you need renewables? Why do you need windmills? Why do you need solar farms? Why do you need any of that with the cost and the objections from people in regional areas when you've got reliable baseload power? So I can just see that entire renewable sector being blown up, and there's a lot of people who are very heavily invested in that sector.
There are, and there's a few interesting points on this. I mean, this week there was this big scandal not scandal, but just sort of big kerfuffle, I guess you'd say, at the beginning of the week, when it took 3 ministers and 2 Dassault Falcon jets to fly up to the Hunter Valley to read a press release. So this is pretty amazing, all about global warming, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But what they were talking about, though, was a $1 billion fund to get a solar panel industry started in Australia. And that involves people like AGL, Mike Cannon-Brookes, Malcolm Turnbull, I think, is involved with this as well. The question to me, though, is if, this solar industry is the way of the future, if renewables are the way of the future, this should be a business case that stacks up on its own, but it's not. And you know why China dominates? It's not nice to talk about. The reason why China dominates the solar panel market is that, A, they use slave labor in Xinjiang province, and B, they've got no environmental controls for this incredibly dirty, polluting process. Yes. So, it's very expensive to do these things in Australia. The conversation that needs to be had now, of course, because Peter Dutton is forcing the nuclear issue. The issue isn't even so much now about the nuclear plants and where they're built and when they're built, as it is that now suddenly all of the numbers and the assumptions of the renewables lobby now face scrutiny. And the more they face that scrutiny, we realize the numbers actually don't stack up.
The numbers never added up. We knew this from the start. You only had to look overseas for other countries.
But now there's a point of comparison.
Absolutely. The numbers don't stack up. They never think about what comes next, and they're just finding that out with EVs, where they just thought there's going to be this explosive growth in EV demand. Everyone's going to be driving EVs. Now they're discovering, oh, wait, once the warranty on the batteries runs out, these cars have zero value. No one wants to buy a car that potentially you'll have to spend 20, 30, 40,000 to replace the battery. So they never sort of even think 5 to 10 years down the track, let alone 20 or 50 years, where they're coming up with this net zero lunacy.
Bring on this election. The Teals will be destroyed. Labor will be out. This is the issue. Nuclear versus renewables, and nuclear will win. That's my prediction. Interesting news for the people of Myanmar, also known as Burma. Julie Bishop, Malcolm Turnbull's former deputy, the
Haven't
one
they
who
suffered enough?
she's off as a United Nations appointment to sort out a special envoy on Myanmar from the United Nations. Well, I'd be a bit worried if I were those generals in Myanmar, because the one thing Julie Bishop was successful at was organising a coup against her own leader. That would be Tony Abbott when she was his deputy. And along with Mr Malcolm Turnbull and other individuals, they brought down our popularly elected Prime Minister. So I'd be a bit worried if I were in Myanmar there, if Julie starts wandering around, pulling out the stilettos, the red stilettos.
They will enjoy the stilettos, the high-end jackets without pants that she likes to wear. Good on her. She's going to have more photo opportunities, I'm sure. So that's...
But on a serious note, it disturbs me when we see our politicians and senior political figures landing these cushy United Nations jobs, these, World Economic Forum type things after that they've left power. I find that, unappealing. Anyway, let's talk about Israel and Gaza. We've had Penny Wong wandering around, Anthony Albanese. They're all busily attacking Israel, as is their preference. Let's go to speak to someone who actually knows what is going on in Israel, someone who has experience there on the ground, and that is, of course, Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, great to see you as always. It will come as no surprise to you that we had Penny Wong, our Labor Foreign Minister, and Anthony Albanese desperately calling for ceasefires, criticising the IDF. Now, yes, of course, it is a tragedy that the 7, including 1 Australian aid workers, were killed. You know from your experience in war this happens. But tell us, what is the danger now for Israel with this kind of constant pressure now for ceasefires and blaming Israel rather than Hamas, who should wear the blame for the tragic deaths of the 7 aid workers? Richard, your thoughts?
Well, we're getting the same noises over here, Rowan, in London about things like arms embargoes and trying to force Israel to stop fighting. This is beginning to take shape over here, particularly after this tragic incident. But the effect really is going to be minimal in relation to Israel directly, unless the United States really turns on Israel and ceases to supply Israel with not only arms and ammunition, but also the political support that it needs. And the effect that has, it will have an effect on Israel. Israel will still be able to fight if it chooses to defy the US. But the effect all of this noise has, coming from Australia, from the UK, from the US and other countries, is to strengthen Hamas. It gives encouragement. Hamas is on its last legs in some respects, and it certainly will be once the IDF go into Rafah in the south. But meanwhile, they're getting courage. They're getting, effectively, they are being encouraged by these people in our countries to fight on and fight harder. And even Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, which is the terrorist organization that threatens Israel from Lebanon, he said today, I think it was, that he's optimistic this war is going to end soon in Gaza because of all the international pressure. This is the kind of empowerment that these uninformed noises give to Israel's enemies.
James.
Colonel Kemp, I want to ask you, though, about what I believe is the real root of this issue here, which is Iran. And it seems to me that the Biden administration in particular is playing a very two-faced game here, where they're acting still supportive of Israel, still supplying arms to Israel, although that support is being progressively withdrawn, while at the same time doing absolutely nothing about stopping Iran supplying arms to Hezbollah, giving aid to Hamas, and allowing it to become the regional hegemon, potentially a nuclear-armed one. How is the Biden administration getting away with this double game?
Well, this is the problem. Biden's administration is fixed on the idea still, even after what happened on the 7th of October by one of Iran's major proxies, the Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, of course, in Gaza, still fixed on the idea of appeasing Iran, of trying to normalize relationships in the region, of trying to get a renewed nuclear deal through. Even now, they're still thinking about this. And the consequences, of course, are that Iran will become more aggressive, not only towards Israel, but to the West as well. In Australia, in Britain, in other European countries, in the US, Iran has sleeper cells, IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Hezbollah sleeper cells, which are ready to attack us. And this sort of encourages that country in its actions. And I mentioned Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah up in the north. They're waiting to attack Israel. They're waiting for the word from Tehran to do it. And by emboldening Iran, that's much more likely to happen. The best way of deterring Iran and deterring Hezbollah is for the world, particularly the US, to give absolute support to Israel to destroy Hamas. And that will send a very, very salutary lesson to both Iran, Hezbollah, and the other proxies in the region.
Rita.
I want to get your response to something our former Foreign Minister Bob Carr said about this tragedy with the aid workers. And I'll just read you what he posted. He said, Israel now adding to its war crimes the assassination of aid workers deliberately, I believe, to worsen food deprivation in Gaza. This suggestion, and I would hope that it's not a widely held one amongst politicians, former or current, that this was somehow deliberate. I mean, just how absurd is that they would deliberately target aid workers to try to starve the Palestinian population?
It's obviously unspeakable nonsense. And we've heard, again, similar noises over here and elsewhere around the world on this. Why would Israel do that? I mean, first of all, if you set aside the laws of war, which Israel scrupulously adheres to, and morality, if you set those aside, what would be the actual purpose of deliberately killing aid workers? It would make no sense at all. Meanwhile, Israel is doing everything it can, everything in its power to allow aid to get into Gaza. And in fact, in the last 6 months since this war began, Israel has permitted aid into Gaza, which is about twice as much as it requires. It's allowed about a year's supply of humanitarian aid into Gaza in 6 months, a year's supply. So, of course, it's nonsense. Israel wouldn't do that. Why would it? And the very idea that a tragic accident like this can be then used against Israel. Israel has admitted it was wrong. It's disciplined some of the people involved in it. It's unfortunately, it's the kind of tragedy that you get in war. I've known many cases like this. And in fact, President Biden, who was outraged by it, in his words, was the president when a similar attack took place against an aid worker and 9 members of his family in Afghanistan in 2021, yes, when a US drone strike hit them thinking they were terrorists. This is horrible, but it happens.
And several children in that particular incident were killed as well as the aid workers. What about this proposal that Israel has to get rid of UNRWA, which Australia's again restored funding to, and to have a body that's not connected to Hamas to do the humanitarian aid? Is that something that is likely to be supported by the international community?
I very much doubt that. I think it's something that's essential. UNRWA is effectively an extension of Hamas. UNRWA is part of the Hamas machinery. UNRWA terrorists took part in the 7th of October massacre. UNRWA delivers aid to their Hamas terrorist masters. Whether they have a choice in that or not, I don't know. But it does need to go. It needs to be replaced by something, whether it be the UN High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, which looks after refugees everywhere else, whether it's some other UN body or indeed outsourcing it to a commercial organisation. I don't know, but it does need to change. Whether that's likely to happen in the near future, I don't know. But I very much doubt. I suspect there'll be a lot of criticism of Israel for trying to do that, as we've already seen.
Richard, just quickly before we go, in your opinion, how quickly could the Israelis, if the West would get off their back and just let them do the job, finish off Hamas? How important is that they do that, get into those tunnels, free the hostages, finish this thing? What reasonably do you foresee happening in the next couple of months?
I think it very much depends on when Israel decides to launch its operation into Rafah. They're still fighting elsewhere in Gaza, but Rafah is the last major stronghold of Hamas. And Israel hasn't yet begun seriously attacking Rafah. And it's obviously there's pressure from the international community to try and stop it. I think one of the factors involved there is what happens up in the north. Of course, Israel can fight a war against Hezbollah and against Hamas at the same time, but it would not be optimum. And so I think Israel is probably looking to see what's emerging in the north before it commits major forces, which we needed to Rafah. It's got 3 divisions up on the border with Lebanon now, and that's obviously in anticipation of a need to get in on the ground in Lebanon and deal with Hezbollah. The sequencing of that is obviously a military decision that can only be known or understood properly by the IDF and by the government in Israel.
Colonel Richard Kemp, always great to chat to you. Thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Common sense there from Colonel Richard Kemp. I'll just point out, of course, that not everybody in UNRWA was involved in October 7th. Certain individuals were, and that is much reason for us to be not financing them, in my opinion, with Australian taxpayers' dollars, which we have been doing thanks to Penny Wong and the Teals. After the break, Rita's reality check, and we'll chat to lawyer Katie Ashby-Coppens about this insidious World Health Organization pandemic treaty stuff in a tick.
Welcome back. You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan Slumlord Dean, James Landrat Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi. Coming up, we'll be delving into an event with 3 feminists and a comic turned into unintentional hilarity, which triggered lefties fleeing the scene. But first, it's instructive to look to America, particularly its blue cities, the ones run by Democrats from San Francisco and LA to New York. It's instructive to observe these places to get a glimpse of what we can look forward to if we don't take a stand against institutional leftist lunacy. Whether it's race or LGBTQIA issues, policies on drugs, homelessness, energy policy, and even little things like the absolute idiocy of banning plastic straws, you can be sure that if some Democrat-run hellhole has tried it, then we will follow soon. It was in the leftist utopia of Seattle where plastic straws were first banned, and we all stupidly followed. So now we have drinks in big plastic cups, plastic packaging everywhere, but with a gross, disintegrating, completely not fit for purpose paper straw. Never mind the inconvenient fact that most of the rubbish in the oceans comes from a number of Asian countries that dump tons of the stuff right into waterways. Now, if you thought this sort of leftist lunacy would stop at paper straws, then let me update you on what is happening in some blue cities in America, with homeowners having their rights stripped away in favour of vagrants, criminals and squatters. Let's see what happened to this poor woman in New York who tried to reclaim her house from squatters.
You shouldn't be trying to steal my house. Yes, you are. You don't even
How about that? A squatter standoff. A property owner confronts a group of people she says moved into her $1 million home in Queens, and our cameras were rolling as dozens of officers showed up.
Several people were taken away in handcuffs, and one of those arrested may surprise you.
Well, it wouldn't surprise you if you've been paying attention. Yep, the poor homeowner there was arrested because she's not allowed to change the locks of her own house to keep out the squatters living there illegally. You see, though she pays all the property taxes, it's the squatters who have the rights.
What's it like being here knowing you can't go inside of your own home?
It's enraging. It really is.
In New York, squatters have rights after 30 days.
By the time that someone does their investigation and they do their work and their job, we'll be well over the 30 days, and this man will have stolen my home. And now she's back.
So, Adele, you're getting arrested right now?
I'm being arrested.
For what?
For being in my own home.
And where's your lease?
She's fighting the house. It's not her house anymore.
My deed is current and legal.
Arrested for unlawful eviction. She changed the locks on a man who claims he lives there.
This situation is so grim that illegal immigrants like this next dude are advising others about how to take advantage of this madness.
Mi gente, he pensado invadir una casa en United States, ya que me enteré que existe una ley que dice que si una casa no está habitada, podemos expropiarla. Capichi, muchachos?
sees it. Yes, these laws are designed to quite deliberately disadvantage law-abiding property owners and empower the squatters. Spare a thought for these property owners who are not only having these freeloaders illegally living in their homes, but as owners, they're obliged to maintain the properties, pay for the upkeep, and even the utilities in some cases.
Why can't you just change the locks?
Oh, I will be arrested instantly.
They turned off the hot water and then reported that they had no hot water. It's a $250 fine per day, up to $15,000, punishable by 5 years in jail.
So here you are, you have to pay the upkeep of the house.
Right. I pay the
and you're not getting any rent?
I'm not getting any rent, and I'm paying the gas and electric every month.
4 stories repeated over and over and over again by irate and often unwitting property owners. Worry lines marking their faces, who came to City Councilwoman Vicky Palladino's office desperately seeking help. Hong Chen has spent thousands trying unsuccessfully to get the squatters out of this home in Mazpath. John Sokran using his pension money for expenses on this College Point home he hoped would provide retirement income. And Susan Mascara, who has used up her savings paying for 7 years of upkeep on this Bayside home she inherited from her mother.
I'm in debt. My credit cards are pretty much maxed out.
If you think we would never be that crazy in this country, well, think again. In Victoria and the ACT, the move to give ever greater rights to tenants at the expense of property owners is underway. Take the issue of pets. If you're leasing out, say, a freshly renovated little one-bedroom unit, and the tenant a week after moving in says, oh, look, you know what, I want to move in 3 massive German Shepherds. You have to say yes, or if you want to say no, you have to apply to the Civil and Administrative Tribunal and convince them why you don't want to have your property trashed. So if you want to say no, you've got to go through the bureaucrats. You can't make that own call on your own property. Watch the American Blue Cities and you'll soon get a clue of what's coming here. And before I go, let's check in with the latest from satirical cartoon series Please Explain. This week, Albo is selling the merits of digital ID, which is entirely voluntary.
Are you sick and tired of the government not having access to all your personal data?
No, not really.
Do you sometimes wish you could just store all your sensitive identification documents in one centralised digital system that's designed and operated by the government?
Huh? No, not at all. Go away.
Well, too bad, because without any debate or scrutiny, we've passed the digital ID bill through Parliament. That's right, we've streamlined the process for you to give us all your sensitive identification documents, and fast. Why be vulnerable to multiple security breaches when you can store all your sensitive data in one convenient, potentially hackable location?
Well, I don't know if I like that.
But that's not all. Finally, there's a way for our mates in the private sector to get free access to your information with less responsibility.
Oh, I'm a bit worried about...
What are you worried about? That this is the first step to a Chinese social credit score system? That we're going to track your carbon use and slap a new tax on you? That we're going to shut down your bank account just because you said mean things about me on Twitter?
You can do that?
Of course we can, but do you really think the government would want that sort of power?
Yes.
Nah, don't be stupid. You can trust us. This is completely safe, effective, and voluntary.
Where have I heard that before?
Oi, stop thinking and just volunteer your data already.
Ho ho! Wait until the Liberal Party hears about this.
This was all their idea anyway. Come on, why haven't you volunteered your information yet? You'd be crazy not to. And crazy is exactly what we're going to call you. If you show a hint of scepticism, we're going to label you a cooker, a right-wing nut job. That's right, you'll volunteer everything and you'll be happy.
No, I don't think I will, thank you very much.
You don't really have a choice here.
Well, the United Nations is trying to turn the World Health Organization into a worldwide health dictatorship through the so-called pandemic preparedness. Joining us now to discuss this further is lawyer Katie Ashby-Coppens. Katie, thanks for coming on Outsiders. You've been very active in warning or attempting to warn Australians about the World Health Organization's pandemic plans. Now, we raised this on Outsiders nearly 5 years ago, the Global Pandemic Treaty. It's been through all sorts of different metamorphoses. It changes names, and you're going to explain the reason for that. It also seems to split into different areas and assemblies and so on. But the bottom line seems to be that the World Health Organization have plans to get all the countries to sign up to something which would make COVID look like a picnic. Is that a correct summation, Katie? Tell us about it.
That is absolutely bang on. That is absolutely bang on, Rowan. At this point in time, the World Health Organization, who is the branch of the UN that is responsible for public health policies, is currently drafting 2 pandemic treaties, which will certainly make the last pandemic look tame. Under the last pandemic treaty, for example, and response to that pandemic, there was the ability for the WHO to make recommendations about border closures and lockdowns, and countries, cooperatively followed many of them. Under these new pandemic treaties, however, the World Health Organization will actually be able to order countries to lock down, border closures, vaccine passports, medical examinations, you name it, in the name of health, equity, inclusivity and cohesion. We have significant amendments that are due to be voted on in May of this year.
Now, Katie, last year or a couple of years ago, we wrote in The Spectator Australia saying that this is going to threaten the sovereignty of nations. Now, that is denied. Politicians and others say, no, the World Health Organization won't be able to take away sovereign powers. But is that the case? Because you've got, as you've said, there are 2 different instruments at play here. One is the pandemic treaty and the other is the international health recommendations. And the key date, or one of the key dates, seems to be coming up in May. What is the event coming up in May, and what are the dangers that could potentially come out of that?
Yeah, so in May, the World Health Assembly, so it's all 194 countries, will be attending Geneva to vote on both of these pandemic treaties. Voting on these pandemic treaties, and if they are adopted, will mean that these significant changes will need to be implemented into our Australian law within the year. That will take us through to May 2025. The issue is that we actually can't reasonably vote on any of these documents at the moment because they're still in a state of flux. Meetings continue, revisions keep happening, and we've actually not even been provided with a final version of these documents to be able to assess whether or not we want to vote yes to adopt them or no not.
Rita?
Well, the World Health Organization didn't exactly cover itself in glory throughout the COVID pandemic. Let's just have a look at, remind ourselves, they repeatedly just regurgitated China's lies about the virus, about how it was early on, even how it was transmitted. They passed on that false information China was providing. They said China's lockdowns work when they don't. So how much credibility does this body have after COVID, given they pandered to China? They won't even let Taiwan be a member of the World Health Organization because it would upset China. I mean, how much credibility does this body actually have?
Well, my view is it has very little to no credibility. It's horribly corrupted within the organisation. It receives at least 85% of its funding from alternative sources, not just the member states. So we're talking private-public partnerships. All of those payments and promises come with promises in return. So it's not doused itself in a whole lot of glory after the last pandemic, and yet under the promise of this new of future and new pandemics just around the corner, we can have the WHO dictating to us as to what the response needs to be. And if they're telling Australia what it has to do and Australia has to follow in due course, then that is sovereignty.
James.
Well, now the lawyers, the politicians, and all of the people who are involved, they say, "Oh no, this is just guidelines. This is nothing you're going to have to follow." But isn't the real danger here that this sort of thing, and they keep saying, another pandemic could be just around the corner. Who knows? That this would provide cover for bullying politicians to come and say, "Look, we have to because it's the law." And that in the heat of the moment, no one's going to be having these sorts of discussions about, do we actually have the legal obligation to follow this? when in fact we should be doing what countries like Sweden did, and the outliers who said we're rejecting the official advice on this, going our own way, and as it turns out, having a much better result.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and that's one of the issues. We will be required to follow these orders if the pandemic treaties get up. But there is a raft of other issues that are buried within these documents. Huge censorship. The WHO will control research and development. Countries will have to scour their countrysides and deliver to the WHO-run laboratories pathogens of pandemic potential, which the WHO will helpfully store on our behalf. Oh, and they've just mentioned they're going to regulate gain-of-function research. So, this is what we're staring down the barrel at. The actual risk of naturally occurring pandemics is so low, but yet we're going to be spending billions of dollars just to be pandemic ready.
And I think, Katie, the key thing here is that we learned from COVID that this centralised authoritarian control, whether it's at a federal or a state level or whatever, or a global level even, does not get you the best results. As James was saying, the best results come when you have debate, discussion, free flow of information, and this World Health Organization, these twin pandemics, threaten all of that. We will see authoritarianism on steroids. It's incredibly dangerous, in my opinion. Now, what can people do who are concerned about this? What is the organisation you are running, Katie, and how can people sign up or get more information or show their support?
Wonderful. So you'll notice that there has been really complete silence about this. Anyone that talks about it, they get shut down very quickly. The censorship is great. Getting informed is really important, and also sharing information is really important. At the Aligned Council of Australia, we've recently brought together, in the last 2 months, over 32 groups in excess of 1.3 million people. And what we are focused on is getting people informed, disseminating that information so people can make decisions for themselves, and making these pandemic treaties an election issue, because they are very significant. They're going to have wide-ranging effects, and they're going to impact us greatly. So the Aligned Council of Australia is available online. We've got some amazing projects coming up. We've got the Australia's greatest letterbox drop happening, where there are 2 million flyers outlining information is going to be provided. We've got massive billboard campaign that's coming to an expressway near you. We are doing significant work at educating the politicians, because they simply have no clue at all. And we are really getting this information out there so people can make decisions for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely critical people make up their own minds. Katie Ashby-Coppins, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders, and keep up the great work. And I'll just add that the authorities tell us that the World Health Organization cannot take away Australia's sovereign powers to make decisions and laws about its citizens. There you go. After the break, your favourites, Net Zany, Lefty Lunacy, Wackademia. So much more here on Outsiders. Well, it's Net Zany, the insane world of climate change predictions, and as the water floods over Warragamba Dam, I am again reminded of those wonderful predictions from the likes of Tim Flannery that even the rain that falls won't fill our river systems or our dams because of climate change. Anyway, Rita, we've had Chris Bowen has been out spruiking his solar panels. Let's have a listen to the man who keeps us all entertained and guarantees that Peter Dutton will win the next election single-handedly. Chris Bowen.
I hope you're having a great Easter. I wanted to give you a quick update about a policy that Anthony Albanese, Ed Husic and I announced last week called Solar Sunshot. A lot of people ask me, why don't we make more solar panels in Australia? And it's a great question, and we should. And so Solar Sunshot will support making solar panels and solar cells in Australia.
And of course, the taxpayer will be subsidising this to the tune of how much? Billion?
$1 billion.
And this policy is so harebrained, so idiotic, that even the leftist think tank, Grattan Institute, came out and criticised it. I mean, this is how badly Chris Bowen's going when Grattan is having a go.
Well, and let's not forget, Rita, too, Bowen is becoming a bigger and bigger embarrassment to the Albanese ministry every week. Remember, Albanese himself had to come in and play clean up on aisle Chris with his emission standards and say, look, we're going to have to water those down a bit because otherwise this really is going to be a full-blown disaster instead of the half-baked disaster that they're working towards. But, you know, the whole thing about this whole solar panel program is that this is about renewable rent seeking. This is about private investors and private companies lobbying the government to invest money into something that, if it was profitable, they would invest the money into themselves. But everything that people need to understand about the whole renewable energy deal is that the providers of renewable energy are given a guaranteed price, guaranteed profits, and you pay the price for that.
And we're all paying the price when we pay. And the new infrastructure that's being rolled out to accommodate this, if you want to know why your bills are skyrocketing in the last decade, that's part of the reason, because this infrastructure is so expensive. I would argue it's unnecessary because there are other options that are available to us.
Absolutely. But let me just quickly point out that Chris Bowen clearly didn't read the Financial Times this week, because as Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen are going, we're going to be the solar panel superpower in the world, which is, of course, impossible. Meanwhile, over in London, the Financial Times reports that there is a glut of solar panels globally, so much so that people are using solar panels as fences. It's cheap garden fencing option. Old disused and unused and unwanted solar panels. What a joke. We'll be the fencing capital of the world. Great work, Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese.
We could have
billions of dollars for...
I'm thinking, you know, we use all those solar panels. We could have a Bowen-proof fence.
Bowen-proof fence. I love it.
Oh, dear.
Listen, speaking of the UK, have a listen to this farmer. I mean, all around the world, and it's happening here in Australia. We'll be talking to Tony Seabrook in a second as well. Farmers are getting absolutely, I'll look for another word than the one I was going to use, done over by these left-wing governments. Have a listen to this UK farmer saying he's just had enough.
We've had enough. Talking. For the last 20 years, we've been attacked by the political classes telling us how to farm in the countryside. Our family have looked after the countryside for over 500 years. We don't need townies to tell us how to farm. We're now being paid to stop growing food and grow wildflowers. It's insanity. And we're thinking of ceasing our production after 500 years.
Absolutely. Now let's grab a little bit of lefty lunacy. Rita and James, a comedy session, an unintentional comedy session, more like it. James.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rita.
Well, you've got three of our favourite feminists involved to begin with. So you've got Clementine Ford.
Oh.
You've got Yumi Steins, and Antoinette Lattouf was the other one.
This sounds like a real laugh a minute.
And people, this was advertised and promoted heavily, and around 90 to 100 people showed up. So that's surprising in itself. But
it was a free event, I think.
It was a free event. But there was also a comic there, part of this inspired unemployed, I should say, inspired unemployed. They do actually do some funny skits. And they were doing a skit. It was going to be part of, he was on the panel, he was asking questions. But the reaction from mainly women who showed up was not positive. Can I read you just a couple of the comments, if I could? This one. Just wasted an hour of time, which I'll never get back. And the poor woman sitting behind me was crying. I'll be okay. But this show probably should have come with a trigger warning. Many upset women tonight, and many other comments of a similar nature.
Do we know
Apparently
what was in
people
this
were
sketch?
streaming out. Well, this man was saying stuff like, I love women's writers and, consent is sexy. I don't know. He was saying silly stuff, that lines he was being fed. It was all supposed to be part of some sort of a skit that it was being filmed that the audience wasn't in on. But the audience wouldn't be in on it, because if you're going to do some sort of a practical joke, you can't let the audience know. That defeats the purpose. But you know what? Surprisingly, these humorous scolds don't have fans who are, who are ready for a laugh.
I was just amazed, Rita, to read not just an article in the Fairfax Press, but also at least one more column by another writer who were all so so absolutely outraged about this. And it just amazed me because, I really thought that feminists had this real reputation, Rita, for incredible senses of humor.
Yeah, of course.
Loving a laugh.
That's why all 90 people queued up.
And so
they were breaking down
I don't
the
know why
doors.
people reacted so badly to this, little bit of edgy humor.
They felt duped. They came along to a fake event. The three women apparently then, to try to, appease the remaining crowd, the half who hadn't walked out, did end up doing an hour of the promised discussion on relationships and sex. I mean, that's what you really want to hear from these three. But that wasn't enough. The criticism is...
What are they holding out for, like some free purple hair dye or something?
There you go. Well, let's look at the darker side of this sort of event. Another performance took place allegedly in a school in South Australia called Renmark, a public school, where it appears, or the allegation is, that Year 9 group of girls were subject to some character from not one of the teachers, but an independent character who for some reason was there. The teachers left the room, and this presentation was about LGBTIQ respectful relationships, in which they delved into the plus. Now, many of us have always wondered what the plus in LGBTQI+ stood for. Corey Bernardi, you will remember, was fired. We used to have a section on this show called Corey Was Right. Here, yet again, Corey was right. He claimed that the plus, or the untold or unspoken stuff in the LGBTIQ agenda, was bestiality and incest, and yep, that's what the Year 9 girls were allegedly shown. Many of them fleeing the classroom, apparently, going to the bathrooms in tears, upset. There's a full investigation into this story, rightly so, but as we warned all along on this show, it's the children who are being abused because of this entire transgender radical agenda. Going to take a short break. We'll be back with lots more in a tick. Monica Smith, don't go away. You're watching Outsiders, and just to clarify what I said before, Corey Bernardi was not literally fired from the Liberal Party, but he did lose his place in the upper cabinet, I think it was. But it certainly led to, his prediction certainly led to Corey Bernardi leaving the Liberal Party, which is obviously what I was referring to. Now, you're watching Outsiders with Rita, the Sting Panahi, with James, Big Con Morrow, and myself, Rowan, the Grifter Dean. Remember that great movie from the early 90s with Angelica Houston and John Cusack, The Grifters?
Grifters, huh? You're one, all right. Grifters got an irresistible urge to be the guy who's wise. There's nothing to whipping a fool.
Everybody was on the take. Everybody was running a scam. Well, this is an opinion show. I'm sure you've noticed our little blue, there it is over there, blue opinion thing that pops up in the corner there, just to remind everyone. So I'm going to give you my humble opinion. In fact, why don't we change that to humble opinion down there? Humble opinion. In my humble opinion, we are living through not one, but multiple scams, some of the greatest scams known to mankind. These scams follow all the rules of the classic grift. First and foremost, the grifters and scammers themselves are making a hell of a lot of money out of the scams. And secondly, the scams are so elaborate and on such a massive scale that, much like the preparations in the equally brilliant movie The Sting, it often takes months or maybe even years to set up the perfect con job, so by the time it comes along, the target of the con, normally the taxpayer or you or me, is completely taken in. Therein lies the art of the successful grift.
It's a nice con, Hickey. I thought you were the feds myself when you came in.
No trouble, Henry. Snyder went for it all the way. You should have seen the rag he lit under Lonergan.
As I said, we are currently living in the era of the multi-grifters. Grift upon con upon scam, with the chief grifters clearly inhabiting big business, academia and left-wing politics, and all making vast sums of money out of the well-laid scams. In each case, the scam follows a tried and tested formula. In fact, let's take the structure of the scams from the original book that inspired the Sting movie, The Big Con. In a classic con, you have the setup, you have the hook, you have the tail, and then the sting itself. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to look at these scams one by one. In my opinion, there's plenty to choose from. There's the climate crisis scam, the militant transgender scam, and of course, the COVID scam. There's the United Nations scam and the World Health scam. We were just talking about that. There's the immigration scam and the native title scam. All of them scams to a greater or lesser degree, in my opinion, and all of them follow more or less the same rules, the rules of the big con. Today, particularly in light of the appointment of our new Governor-General, whose career I will dive into later on in, appropriately, Clown Show, I want to look at what I believe to be one of the greatest scams of the last few decades, the diversity and inclusion scam. So, as with the rules of the big con, let's start with the setup. Diversity and inclusion began all the way back under President John F. Kennedy, who signed Executive Order 10925 in March 1961, mandating that government departments, quote, take affirmative action to ensure that employees are treated fairly without regard to their race, creed, colour or national origin, end of quote. LBJ 4 years later ramped that up to mandate that government employers, quote, hire without regard to race, religion and national origin. So far, so good. This was, in reality, simply legislating what Martin Luther King had urged in his famous I Have a Dream speech, that people not be judged by the colour of their skin, but rather by the content of their character, i.e. on merit. No right-minded person could argue with that. But of course, on the left, they did. And here's where the scam began, with the hook. In 1978, all hell broke loose when affirmative action was challenged in the US Supreme Court in the University of California versus Alan Bakke case. Bakke claimed he had missed out on getting into the university because of the university's affirmative action program. The justices simply could not agree whether affirmative action that promoted blacks at the expense of whites was legal or not. Basically, they fudged it, saying that race-based affirmative action in principle was a good thing, but in this one instance had gone too far and Bakke had to be admitted to the university, which he was. Affirmative action would then stay fudged all the way to last June, when the Supreme Court in the US finally deemed race-based affirmative action in university admissions illegal. They banned it. But that was just last year. The damage had been done. Despite Ronald Reagan threatening but failing to dismantle affirmative action laws in the 80s, US universities were now pretty much free to discriminate as they saw fit against whites or against Asians or against Indians or against whoever they chose in order to promote diversity and inclusion. Bingo. Which brings us to the next phase of the big con, the tail. During the 1990s and early 2000s, there was a very clever but subtle shift in the tail surrounding affirmative action, both within the universities, which became more and more diverse with a diverse workforce. They decided that a diverse workforce should be seen not just as a legal requirement, but rather as a competitive advantage. In other words, that diversity was in and of itself good for business. By 2015, you had companies like McKinsey, one of the richest management consultant companies in the world, coming up with all sorts of studies purporting to show just that, claiming that dramatic improvements to business success occurred when companies prioritized diversity over merit. So we now had a business case for diversity. Deloitte's even proposed a laughable mathematical formula. Quote, diversity plus inclusion equals better business outcomes. This tale was believed and promoted by governments, businesses, and academics all around the world. The idea that in and of itself, diversity would make you money. So what happened? Diversity hires and inclusion picks exploded. A whole new language with phrases like unconscious bias sprung up to disguise what, in my opinion, was simply old-fashioned racism, judging people not by the content of their character, but by the colour of their skin, a complete inversion of the ideals of Martin Luther King. Which brings us to the sting. Diversity and inclusion is now huge business around the Western world, worth untold billions. Boardrooms lap it up, businesses tout their credentials, careers are built solely upon it, HR thrives on it, shares trade on diversity data, with shareholders swindled into swallowing a whole new set of DEI stats. Meanwhile, the world goes backwards faster and faster in terms of productivity and growth. Debt rages throughout the West and inflation spirals out of control, but diversity and its greedy twin, inclusion, thrive. Recently, we all had the nonsense surrounding Harvard University's Claudine Gay. In 2020, Claudine, then Dean of Social Sciences at Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences, hired its first Associate Dean of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging, with the primary goal of increasing diversity on campus. 2 years later, Harvard proudly announced Claudine Gay had been selected as the first black female president of Harvard University on an annual salary of well over $1 million Aussie dollars. Big bucks. Claudine Gay, the proud diversity and inclusion academic who specialised in diversity and inclusion and whose main focus was on promoting more diversity and inclusion, was now running the whole shebang, fostering more and more diversity and inclusion. Not bad work if you can get it. Until, alas, she was forced to resign after a major plagiarism scandal following hard on the heels of an equally unedifying anti-Semitism scandal, with her stepping down being seen by many commentators as possibly spelling the end of diversity and inclusion in academia. But here's the thing. Last week, an updated analysis by 2 economics professors published on Econ Journal Watch claims that those original McKinsey studies were totally bogus. They maintain that there was no link proven between greater racial and ethnic diversity and greater sales or greater growth or higher stock prices. Allow me to read you an abridged version of the abstract. Quote, in a series of very influential studies, McKinsey reports finding statistically significant positive relations between profits and the racial ethnic diversity of their executives. However, when we revisit McKinsey's tests, we do not find statistically significant relations between McKinsey's measures of executive racial ethnic diversity and earnings, sales growth, gross margin, return on assets, return on equity, and total shareholder return. Our inability, says the abstract, to quasi-replicate their results, our inability to do so suggests that the McKinsey studies should not be relied on to support the view that firms can expect to deliver improved financial performance if they increase the racial ethnic diversity of their executives. Bang. The balloon has popped. Diversity and inclusion, in my opinion, is a scam. And I'm not alone. This week, we learnt that the University of Texas is closing down its diversity and inclusion division, forcing some DEI deans to return to, oh, what a surprise, teaching, and eliminating other diversity, equity, and inclusion positions altogether. The setup, the hook, the tail, and the sting. We live in an era of the grand scams, and I intend to expose them one by one. Well, our next guest is no stranger to outsiders. Monica Smith was arrested during COVID. Here's the clip. You remember this one?
We need to have a chat to you about a matter of informants, so I need to place you under arrest for that, okay?
Pardon?
At the moment, you're under arrest for incitement.
Have you guys been following me?
Yep, the grand old glorious days of authoritarian Dan Andrews' COVID government. Monica spent 22 days in custody for refusing to sign draconian bail conditions after being charged with incitement. Her crime was to publish an anti-lockdown protest poster on social media. Monica detailed the whole saga in a remarkable book, Cell 22, which you can order from her website, monicasmith.com. It's a great read. And Monica is a very brave lady, and I'm delighted, as always, to have her here on Outsiders with us. Monica, apart from all your other travails, which we could talk about for hours, but I particularly want to talk to you. You've become an absolute heroine in the freedom movement around the world. You've travelled around the world, spoken at many events. But you've taken this issue of cash to heart. Now, last week, I talked about Tuesday being the cash day, you know, take cash out of the ATMs. Many people came up to me, they clearly supported this. Shopkeepers and others said to me, what a great thing, thank you for doing it and pushing it. Monica, you were behind this. This is pretty much something that you are very much involved with and pushing for. So tell us about it, tell us about the success and why you believe it was so important.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks for having me again. And thanks for reminding me of prison on a Sunday morning. But anyway, we'll get past that. Look, I got to be honest, no one actually knows who started the Take Cash Out Day on Tuesday. No one knows. Probably the person who did it knows. But the reason it was so successful, and I wasn't behind it, the reason it was so successful is because it was organic. One person came up with an idea. It wasn't branded. No one put their name behind it. It worked because it was a good idea. And it worked because Australians, in especially my audiences, I guess you could say, we have tried so many things, Rowan, and as you know, a lot of them have fallen on deaf ears. And taking cash out and spending cash is something that everyone can do, which is very empowering, and it belongs to nobody. And it also goes across so many political spheres, like left and right, whether you've had 10 jabs or no jabs, everyone wants to keep cash alive. And that's why the campaign is working really well. So nobody owns it. Rowan, isn't that great?
It's good. But tell us why it is so important, in your opinion, Monica.
It's so important because people don't want to lose the freedom of being able to spend cash where they want to without anybody knowing, or without, like, even things like putting $5 in your grandchild's birthday card. All those things would be taken away. You know, you can't do you can't do jobs for your mates for a bit of cash or a bit of beer or this, that and the other. And those are the simple things. But then, of course, you've got the sinister things, like obviously the government tracking you and potentially restricting the sorts of things that you spend money on. For example, myself, Rowan, during those times, I wasn't really the government's best friend. And I wonder if there was a social credit system, I wonder if I would have been able to go to the grocery store after doing those social media posts. And that's the more sinister side of things.
Well, tell me about this digital ID, because it's gone through, it's there. The government will tell you it's entirely voluntary, so there's nothing to fear there. What's your take on it?
Remember last time Katie Gallagher talked about voluntary things with the mandates? Well, that wasn't so voluntary. So I don't think people really trust people like Katie Gallagher as far as they can throw her. But look, the practicality of digital ID is that it's going to take a while for them to bring in, and they couldn't even do contact tracing properly. So I don't really have high hopes for them actually being able to do this anytime soon. But of course, how will they keep our data safe? I mean, you had the Medibank data breach, you had the Optus data breach. There's been others as well that we don't even know about that isn't publicised. So I think people are really concerned about all their data being in one place, because anything online is hackable. That is the internet. So I don't think it's coming in anytime soon, but I think people are afraid of it, and I think they need to understand that they can say no at some point, I hope.
James.
What do you say to people who say, oh, well, you know, the government already has so much of my data, so much of my information? I mean, anybody who deals with different government agencies, you know, knows they all know what your income is. They all know your health status. They know all of these things already. What do you say to people, and how do you explain that this is actually a much bigger leap beyond already the data matching that the government's already able to do through things like, you know, the MyGov website and the ways that connects to different agencies?
Yeah, look, a convenience is what's going to sell this to people, of course. And I don't know, a lot of people have recently realised how sinister people in the government can be. So they signed up to these things, and I did myself as well over the last 15 years thinking, this is great, you know, I can tap my phone, I can do this, I can sign into my MyGov. I think it's only recently that people have realised that in the wrong hands, this sort of data being in one place is a real concern. So a lot of people aren't going to care. You're right. But I would say to them, do you trust the government with all of your data in one place? Do you trust them to keep it safe? And I haven't had nobody be able to say yes to that answer.
But Monica, you raised a really important point that you were kind of at odds with the Andrews government. They were following you around, they threw you into jail. I mean, it can't get any worse than that. But it could have been worse if they'd done what Justin Trudeau did in Canada to people doing no more than what you were doing, which is protesting against lockdowns and mandates, vaccine mandates and so on. They actually did stop them accessing their money, stop them being able to get any cash to even feed their kids or fill up their cars with petrol. That is what a left-wing government did like that, without even batting an eyelid to hundreds of people. So I think you were right to make the point that had the Andrews government been able to, it probably would have done similar to you, would be my contention. Would you agree with that?
Well, I am actually really grateful in a way that Justin Trudeau did that, because it showed the world that it's possible and he didn't have to justify himself. And I remember a grandma got her bank account closed because she bought one T-shirt to support the truckies. Yeah. So, and then Nigel Farage had his account blocked in the UK. So now when you're starting to talk to people about these things happening, it's more realistic to them and they can understand. So it's actually a good thing that Justin did that. So thanks, mate. Thanks for that.
And well done on supporting the cash out thing. I mean, the trick is, of course, Monica, to keep people using cash and not just doing it on that one particular day, but people getting used to it and using it. And anecdotally, that's certainly what I'm hearing. A good use of people's cash would be to buy your book, Cell 22, and it's a great read. So people, you may not want to relive your experiences at the hands of the Andrews government, but I think there's plenty of people who should read it and would certainly find it riveting read. Thanks so much, Monica Smith. Always great to chat to you here on Outsiders. After the break, James's donkey vote, and we'll speak to Tony Seabrook about nature-positive plans. Be warned in a tip.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Duncan Rowan Dean, Rita Rebound Panahy, and I'm James White Men Can't Jump. No, we really can't. Morrow. That's right, we're talking basketball, and specifically Kamala Harris talking basketball, and how good women's college basketball and March Madness really is. See if you can make heads or tails out of this one.
Do you know, okay, a bit of a history lesson. Do you know that the women's teams were not allowed to have brackets until 2022? Think about that, and talk about progress, better late than never, but progress, and what that has done, because of course when, I had a bracket, it's not broken completely, but I won't talk about my bracket. But you know what? Just how we love March Madness, and even just now allowing the women to have brackets, and what that does to encourage people to talk more about the women's teams, to watch them. Now they're being covered, and this is the reality. People used to say, "Oh, women's sports, who's interested?" Well, if you can't see it, you won't be. But when you see it, you realize, oh.
Excuse me, ma'am, this is a Wendy's. As Twitter wag Stephen L. Miller said, she's acting buzzed on White Claws at happy hours here and hitting on a dude at a bar. What is this? Anyway, plenty of commentators leapt on what she said to note that Harris, not for the first time, managed to get this one completely wrong. The whole thing she was talking about, brackets, I guess it's better than school buses, which are the visual representation of the tournament for women's basketball, well, they've been doing that for years, and the Veep's office, this really does look especially like an episode of Veep these days, doesn't it, was quick to clear it up, claiming that Harris meant the March Madness branding. Oh, okay. Sure, Kamala, we believe you. Millions wouldn't. But now on to more serious business. This week, The world was outraged when a crew of humanitarian aid workers working behind enemy lines in Gaza was killed in an Israeli airstrike. The event prompted international condemnation and gave the Biden administration an excuse to crab walk even further away from its support for Israel and towards what is its true goal, a ceasefire that would allow Hamas to remain in power and eventually the creation of a Palestinian state, with all that that entails. Now, we can talk about the politics, sure. As always, when the Democrats are in power, foreign policy is just an extension of domestic identity politics, and Biden is terrified of losing support among Muslim voters in places like Michigan. There is also the bigger story, of course, though, of how Joe Biden is just continuing the foreign policy of Barack Obama, who seemed to make spreading chaos in the Middle East and elevating the mullahs of Iran his #1 priority. But what I actually want to talk about here is the real rank hypocrisy. Because, terrible things happen in war. We know it. But it seems like Israel is the only nation that is held to the standard of perfection. Here's a State Department spokesman slamming the deaths.
It doesn't really matter how they made the mistake. At the end of the day, you have 7 dead aid workers who were there trying to deliver humanitarian assistance. So whatever the reason was that led to this tragedy, whatever the mistake that happened inside the IDF, it's unacceptable. And they need to do better, and they need to put measures in place to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
And here's Secretary of State Anthony Blinken.
Israel is a democracy. Hamas, a terrorist organization. And democracies place the highest value on human life. Every human life. As has been said, whoever saves a life saves the entire world. That's our strength. It's what distinguishes us from terrorists like Hamas. If we lose that reverence for human life, we risk becoming indistinguishable from those we confront.
Well, here's the thing, though. Israel has taken responsibility. The IDF has shown, sorry haters, reverence for life, a reverence that Hamas certainly hasn't. And it has sacked those responsible for the tragedy. So the question is, how can the Biden administration sit on its high horse here? Remember back in 2021? The U.S. accidentally, so it claimed at the time, droned an innocent Afghan family, killing 10, 7 of them children. And guess what? Despite the outrage, no one was fired. A Pentagon spokesman was asked about this week, but all he could do was duck the question.
In August 21, 2021, the U.S. launched a drone strike that killed 7 children and 3 adults. For several days, people in this building, including your predecessor and the former chairman, insisted it was a righteous mission. Nobody was punished for it. Nobody lost their job over it. I mean, is the U.S. really in a position to be outraged about what happened in Israel, since it seems to almost mirror what happened what the U.S. did in Afghanistan?
Yeah, Mike. I mean, I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to be able to talk about the past. All I can talk about today is the present, and the fact is, 7 civilians who were delivering food to people who are in extreme need were killed in an airstrike. So it's a tragic situation. I think we can all agree, and so I'll just leave it there.
I'm sorry, but when it comes to international law and humanitarianism and reverence for life, you either hold everyone to the same standard, or you hold Israel to one and Hamas to another, and in doing so, look like a bunch of hypocrites.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. After the break, Canberra Clown Show. In a tick. Roll up, step right this way, ladies and gentlemen. It's the greatest show on earth, the Canberra Clown Show, starring Gigi, a modern romantic comedy show, the hilarious tale of a talented woman, Gigi, definitely not a token woman, by the way, who rises through the ranks to become royalty herself, with Maurice Chevalier there in the top hat. Oh, hang on, what? Sorry. Good grief, technical mistake. Wrong Gigi. It's not that Gigi, it's this Gigi. The story of young Samantha, a carefree young lawyer who gets to wield unbelievable power throughout the land. Oh, look, it's Noel Pearson in the Maurice Chevalier role, and who gets crowned by a grateful nation as our brand new Governor-General, or Gigi, as she will affectionately be known to all from now on. And what a tale it is. Samantha began her impressive Cinderella-like rise to becoming the King's representative in Australia by working for a Labor impresario affectionately nicknamed the Lizard of Oz. Prior to that, of course, Samantha had cut her teeth working for the equally dashing young Hollywood heartthrob Michael Kirby, star of such classics as The Countess of... Oops, sorry, wrong Michael Kirby. I mean this Michael Kirby. Easy mistake to make. The highly respected High Court judge. Samantha also squeezed in stints at Freehills and at Gilbert and Tobin. I've always wanted to work with people with a higher purpose, Sam later explained. But obviously not for too long, apparently, because next thing you know, our intrepid Samantha has moved to Channel 7. She's still in her 20s, and from there she hopped straight into Paul Keating's office. But before you could say this is the sweetest victory of them all, Samantha was on the move again. Next thing, Sam pops up at Optus, where she said a great big yes to becoming Director of Corporate Affairs. But you can't keep a good Sheila down, I always say, and before you know it, Sam is on the organising committee for the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, and then from there it's a quick dash to 2004, where Samantha is appointed one of the commissioners in charge of the AFL. But, and I stress this point, it was definitely not a tokenistic appointment.
It's anything other than tokenism, and I've not done anything in my life that could smack of tokenism.
Oh, but hang on. If it wasn't a tokenistic appointment, and I'm not saying it was, how come the only people interviewed for the job were all women? Turns out it was a quota after all, as Samantha herself told the ABC.
They ran a process. It was a very long, detailed process involving 10 women who were sought around the country and interviewed multiple times before a decision was made at the end. And I was very much the lucky last woman standing.
Yes, I guess we'll just let that one through to the keeper. But Samantha was just warming up over the next few years in no particular order. High-flying Sam pops up as a director of Virgin Australia. She gets tracking on with the Transurban Group, hobnobs at the exclusive O'Connell Street Associates, digs in at Mirvac before bouncing into Citibank Australia, where I'm exhausted, where she got very excited about responsible financing, i.e. spending billions on climate change and sustainability. Ah yes, climate change. By now, Samantha was well and truly committed to that particular cause. More about that in a sec. But if you thought our future Gigi's CV was already a little overcrowded, whoa, hold your horses. Have I mentioned Chair of Aware Super and Albert's Music, Chair of the Women's Economic Equality Task Force, President of Chief Executive Women, Chair of Women's Climate Action Group 1 Million Women, Chair of Beyond Blue, Chair of Australia's Investing in Women, Chair of Ozfilm, the film people, on the Climate Council, and on and on and on it goes. As John Roscombe wrote brilliantly in The Fin this week, quote, Sam Mostyn has been described as a businesswoman. Another description of her might be as a professional company director. Australia has become, says John, a nation of talkers, not doers. Mostyn has collected numerous credentials, says John, and titles, but in truth, her achievements are thin. Scathingly but accurately, Roscombe declares that she is the Governor-General from the Chairman's Lounge. How likely is it that she will perform the key job of a GG and maintain strict political neutrality? You decide. Here she is, lending her name to the Uluru Statement. And here she is in a tweet, since deleted, referring to Australia Day as Invasion Day and supporting the claim that Australian land, your home, my home, our homes, always was and always will be Aboriginal. So much for the rule of Commonwealth law and property rights. Following the defeat of The Voice, Sam told Julia Gillard she had become untethered because Australia wasn't big enough to vote for The Voice. How patronising can you get?
The population still don't fully recognise that history and somehow consign that to kind of wokedom or a revisiting of history rather than a truth-telling exercise. I, frankly, after the referendum, I felt completely untethered because I thought perhaps we were a big enough nation and there was enough understanding to actually make that step.
Untethered? Untethered means detached. Detached, I would argue, from reality.
It is fitting to be here today in Canberra on Ngunnawal country, where I pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, to elders past and present, and to any other people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT and the surrounding regions.
Untethered indeed. Ms Mostyn has a long career in political activism, her shtick being to combine progressive causes, you know, environmental and women, First Nations and climate change, that sort of stuff. Here she was spouting what I would call woke virtue signalling gibberish. Others will disagree with me, of course, all the way back in 2008. At Kevin Rudd's Lovey's Ideas Fest, also known as the 2020 Summit.
Now, what idea did you bring to the table today?
Well, my idea probably links into Greg Bourne's comments about the scale of the climate change that we're facing. And I think that at moments like this, we have to stop thinking of ourselves as a country that's so dependent on natural resources that are in the ground and think about being a resourceful nation that actually stops wasting things, wasting time, wasting resources, wasting human capital, and do all of that whilst protecting the most vulnerable in our communities so they come with us and we all change our behaviour together. And one of the main presentations this morning that I was really moved by was the fact that we haven't been facing challenges for 200 years in this country. It's been 60,000 years or more, and we have so much to learn from people who were here prior to our first fleet arriving, who actually can help us on the climate change debate. And we'll learn about reconciliation issues along the way with respect.
She packed it all in there. Well, 4 years ago, Sam received the United Nations Day Honour Award in recognition of her efforts to advance sustainable development and her leadership in diversity and inclusion. That same year, she popped up on the ABC spruiking a whole grab bag of woke boardroom causes, including praising Black Lives Matter and sneering at our colonial past.
Sustainability for me is, I guess, the overarching challenge that picks up our response to climate change, our response to social inequality, the issues we've discussed about who belongs around the tables of power. So what does new power look like in a world where people really do have a chance to participate in the decisions that affect their lives? And of course, we're living in a time where Black Lives Matter right around the globe is teaching us about what it means to have privilege or not have privilege. And I think that rests very heavily in Australia on our need to be the country we can be if we start with addressing some of the things we haven't wanted to deal with that start with the way in which this country was formed in the early days of the colonies, and the fact that the education that you and I had that didn't tell us about the 60,000-year rich history of Indigenous ownership of the land that was never ceded, but was then taken by the occupiers that came to create the nation we now call Australia. For people like me to put aside some of my white privilege and to listen and cede those opportunities to those that should be helping us understand that, I feel that we can actually handle many more of the other questions that come, because I think we'll be a much more settled country, a happier country, and one that's drawing on the most extraordinary culture that can help us solve sustainability issues.
Oh.
And there's lots more. A pampered, woke, elitist, left-wing eco-activist and friend of Labor who is also an advisor to the Teals. I would argue for this critical, impartial constitutional role, it would be hard to find anyone less suited than Sam Mostyn. Still, it's bound to be primetime entertainment for the Canberra Clown Show news star performer, Gigi.
While you were trembling on the brink, was I out yonder somewhere blinking at a star? Oh, Gigi, have I been standing up too close? Oh.
This is Tanya Plibersek's secretive thing. They've all sorts of stories. I've spoken to many people about it. It's shrouded in secrecy. People are brought into meetings. They're not allowed to reveal. They're not allowed to photograph things, not allowed to take anything away. And these meetings are then being told, oh, yeah, we consulted everybody. We consulted everybody. Business and industry are extremely scared and unhappy about this thing. Why? Because Australia already has the most draconian and onerous environmental laws to protect species and habitat, which is all great, in the world. The most onerous in the world. And yet this Labor government ain't happy with that. They're going to ramp it up on steroids. They're going to make it virtually impossible to do business, to do mining, to do agriculture, to do developments without adhering to this nature-positive globalist philosophy. It's terrifying stuff. It's shrouded in secrecy, which seems to be the only way that this government knows how to operate. One of the many, many people, including who knows, because they won't even reveal where all these so-called species, threatened species are. Who knows? Could be you, could be any business. But one of the people, of course, being affected by this is agriculture and mining in WA. And here's Tony Seabrook from the Pastoralist and Graziers Association in WA to talk to us about his fears. He alerted us to the WA cultural heritage, you will remember, during the Voice campaign. Tony, what's this nature? But we thought we just escaped WA heritage, we've just escaped the Voice, and now they're trying to foist nature positive on us. What's going on?
Right, it's the same people, the ACH people in the back rooms, the Voice in the back rooms, the elites in Canberra, out of touch, trying to foist upon us something we didn't ask for, we don't need, and will cost us a huge amount in the long run. It's amazing how they dress things up. Social justice, fairness, all these words they use, nature positive. They wrap it around in cosy words, but in actual fact, this is almost a repeat performance of what they did with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan about 12, 14 years ago. The farmers over there built a great fire and burnt the damn thing because it didn't suit what agriculture needed. And they're doing it again, all over again.
Rita.
Well, yeah, we do have these unelected bureaucrats who are wielding enormous power. Tell us about these consultations, these really confidential consultations that they've had to figure out what this nature positive plan is going to look like. Has there been any satisfaction from those meetings from industry as far as you know?
No, not really. When people have to sign a non-disclosure document before they get invited into the inner sanctum, you know you got a problem. You really got a problem. And the ACH stuff that came out of nowhere, the people that dreamed up the concept of the Voice and what they were proposing to do with that. And what worries me most of all is at the very head of this, we're seeing that phrase, Indigenous and heritage. You know, this is terrifying stuff. You know, these people represent a very small portion of our population. They don't have any track record of conservation or care. They survived on this land for a long time. Remarkably, they survived. But when I hear them continue talking about Indigenous land care, what the hell is Indigenous land care? What did they do? How did they do it? We don't need them front and centre of this. And most farmers are very careful about looking after their land. We do not need bureaucrats turning up here in white cars telling us what to do.
Well, Tony, we know farmers take good care of their land, but we also know that a lot of the renewables providers don't take great care of their land. We know about environmental impact statements for wind farms and solar farms that are going to be devastating for wildlife. Will this nature positive plan apply to any of these massive renewables projects, or do they get a pass?
We don't know. And that is the issue. We just don't know. But look, there's a great phrase about do-gooders. Do-gooders always think they're doing good, and they're often not. They're doing harm. And quite simply, we feed every Australian remarkably well, and we then feed another 50 million people all around the world. The federal government had an inquiry a while ago into food security in Australia, and I added to the report we put in at the very end of it the greatest threat to food security in Australia is actually the government and bureaucracy.
Absolutely. And Tony, just before we go, you know, they will say, oh, no, this was just a talking point. We were floating the idea, the usual thing. But one of the things that came out of one of the so-called consultations was a 40-kilometre speed limit across the Pilbara. Now, I've driven across the Kimberley, and you don't go at 40k. And if you did, you'd probably die of thirst or starvation. As for getting the fresh prawns across the Pilbara at 40k's, good luck with that. This is how out of touch they are.
It's a Kimberley bubble. And what I'd like to say, just to wrap up, Thomas Sowell said a little while ago, there is nothing more stupid than putting decisions in the hands of people who pay no penalty whatsoever for being wrong. And I have no faith
Absolutely.
in democracy.
Yeah. And thanks, Tony. Now, of course, you are speaking on April 17th at the Australia The Road Ahead conference there in Fremantle. You've got some great speakers there. Brendan O'Neill will be there, all sorts of people, John Anderson, Scott Hargraves, Janet Albrechtson. It's going to be a fantastic day there,
Right,
so I urge people.
A fantastic day. I'm very much looking forward to it. We don't have a lot of opportunity, those of us that believe in what you and I believe in, to actually say what we think and what we feel. And this will be a great chance.
So go to the www.australia.theroadahead.org. Get your tickets. If you're lucky enough to be in WA, make sure you're there to see Tony and all those other great people. That's it for us. We got Hyperbole now.
No.
Not quite for us.
Early, dear. God.
Hyperbole. We have some doozies for you here. We have here's Anthony Albanese, who seemed to confuse the Israeli Defence Forces with the Australian Defence Forces.
Prime Minister Netanyahu did accept responsibility on behalf of the Australian Defence Force for this tragedy.
Great to have your finger on the pulse there, Albo. Rita, we've got Joe Biden here. Just have a quick look at how the lies are told and then the truth comes out. Let's have a look.
The border is closed. The border is secure.
The border is secure.
The only reason the border is not secure is Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican friends.
Oh, it's perfect, isn't it? It's secure, and if it's not, it's all Trump. Never mind when Trump was actually in power, that southern border was being properly policed, and the illegal arrivals were at a minimal level compared to where they are now, where records have been set every year of the Biden presidency.
Can I tell you what Joe Biden said there? The only reason why the border is not secure is not because of Donald Trump. It's because the Democrats want two things. They want to flood the country with cheap labor for their corporate donors and corporate donor mates, and they want to eventually give amnesty to millions of potential Democrat voters down the road. That's why the border's open. Donald Trump had nothing to do with it.
Exactly. But we love on this show Pierre Poilievre. He is, of course, the Canadian Conservative opposition leader. Hopefully he'll be the next Prime Minister there in Canada. Have a listen to him now talking about Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau's not a Liberal. It might surprise you to hear me say that. He's not a Liberal. Liberals used to believe in liberty, and Conservatives believed in conserving it. That was the common sense consensus we had in Canada. Justin Trudeau does not believe in liberty. He believes in government control.
He goes on to say Trudeau is all about control, and he himself, Poilievre, wants smaller government, James.
Yep. Well, I mean, Poilievre is setting the model, I think, for conservative leaders, opposition leaders around the world. He's taking on all of these sorts of big issues. He's taking on the press, and he has no fear in absolutely just smashing them and their gotcha questions. And also, he's absolutely right about liberty. I mean, Justin Trudeau. Remember the truckers. Remember COVID. Remember their lockdowns. Remember how they tried to debank people and shut people down from their livelihoods, from even buying food and insurance for their trucks and all sorts of other things, all because they disagreed with the government. The Liberals, the left, in the 60s and everything, free this, free that, we're all against the man. They became the man, and they became worse than the establishment that they thought they were replacing.
Excellent. Now let's have some Weekly Wokely. Rita, some Weekly Wokely.
Well, I want to talk firstly about this great-grandmother, this woman, Rebecca Laverns, 72 years of age. zero criminal record. She's facing a year in jail plus a massive fine. Why? Because she entered the Capitol on January 6th peacefully, didn't damage anything, and prayed for about 10 minutes and then left. But this obsession with painting January 6th as one of the worst events in American history, an insurrection, a dangerous moment in American history, she's now facing this horrific possible consequence for praying for a few minutes in there and then leaving.
James?
Well, yeah, we've seen this time and time again. We've seen violation of due process. We've seen people kept for months and months and months on the most trumped-up charges. You know, this whole attempt by the left to turn January 6th into the whole, you know, they're almost a reason for being, and that this is just sort of like scary fairy tale that they tell themselves at night, you know, about why they need to stop Trump. And, you know, we know that they tried to organize the J6 committee to present the most extreme version of events so that simply it could be a campaign commercial. It's failed completely. But, you know, this real human toll of this is innocent people who didn't do anything violent. Many of them just walked through the building, and there's all the footage we've seen of them walking through peacefully, not damaging anything. Unlike the mostly peaceful protests of the previous year, you know, when we had courthouses and police stations under siege, police attack, properties burned down, and everything else. You know, that wasn't an insurrection. Please, come on. That was far worse.
Well, absolutely. And we had deaths. We had more than 2 dozen deaths. We had so many people bashed. We had properties burnt down. We had, I think, a couple of $1 billion worth of just property damage, never mind all the other. And you look at some of the consequences, the people who engaged in that, sometimes very minimal to no consequences, but the January 6 participants, they are being absolutely treated like political prisoners. It is, I think, going to become an election issue because I think more and more Republicans are saying, well, even if I didn't agree with what happened on January 6th, even if I didn't agree with them going into the Capitol, the way they're being treated
they're so over the top. It's insane. Just tell us about this. The ABC, Rita, this week come out with some interesting language.
Well, they just can't help themselves. They cannot just, even when they're talking about a women's health issue, they've got to put in a phrase like, what is it here? People assigned female at birth. No.
Why use one word when five will do? Yeah.
It's just, they just can't, even if they use the word women, they will add that because God forbid we should, I don't know, offend 6 people in the world. Like they will offend 50% of the population to avoid offending 6 people.
Yeah, exactly. James? People assigned, were you assigned a man at birth, I trust?
Oh, well, male assigned, happily assigned, yes.
It's unbelievable. That's it for Outsiders this week. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next Sunday morning, bright and early at 9 a.m. Make sure you see Rita during the week at 11 p.m. and James, of course, US Report. Never miss that on Fridays at 8 p.m. We'll see you at 9 a.m. Have a great rest of the weekend. See ya.